We've also studied irrigation systems in Nepal, and were able over time to develop a large data set, and we were able to look at those that were beyond the ones we've done earlier, with those run by engineers and the government and those built by the farmers. And the farmers' systems were very primitive. The takeoff from the creek is just mud and logs, but we got measures of crops, how much they actually grew in a year, whether how much they invested in, so we could look at payoff and cost and thus efficiency. And we looked at equity, how much water got to the tail end, and water systems can be very inequitable where people head in and grab water. So it challenged, again, the dominant theory that farmers would not be able to self-organize something like that. They're supposed to be able to use their own farm, but, oh no, they couldn't do something like building or something like that. Now we're studying forestry systems around the world. The International Forestry Resources and Institutions Research Program. We're working in 3 countries in Africa, 3 in Latin America, in the US, and in Nepal and India and Thailand. It is an interdisciplinary research team that is both ecologists and social scientists. We go in and very carefully get the boundaries of a forest. And sometimes the physical boundaries actually have 2 institutional markers, like one's the government, one's the private side by side, or something like that. And then it will be 2 forests. We'll sample separately so that we are looking at forests as governed by particular institutions. And we all use the same methods. We're now up to over 250 forests that we've studied. And now some of them we've been able to go back a second time and some a third time. And this is now long-term. We can look at ecological disturbances, we can look at political disturbances, internal things, and rule changes, all of that. And the findings are pretty interesting. What we're finding is that monitoring is one of the big things associated with success. And success here is that reduced degradation. So in the region we are looking at some of them where degradation has been studied. And if the forest we're looking at do self-monitoring, degradation is not going to steady down, or it may even be regrowing. We're looking at trade-offs and synergies, because some people will say, oh, well, if you really want to have forest growth, you can't let anybody harvest, and there can't be any livelihood they get out of it, and we're finding synergy rather than negative. We find that somewhat the relationship of larger forests enabling you to get more out of it, as well as again, the livelihoods increased. But what we're finding is that when the communities do have at least some long-term harvesting rights that are recognized, it may not be timber, it may be non-timber forest products, but that gives them a future. And so people who have an expectation of future for this forest then pay more attention and monitor one another, and the forest is in a better condition. We've looked at, time after time, we've looked at things like private forests, government forests, community forests, open access. Well, open access is a failure, but of the 3 property rights systems, we're not finding strong relationships. We're finding the monitoring and the interest that the locals have, and that they are really in there working on it and investing. That's what's making a difference. Okay, so if we go to current developments, I think we've now established that the theory of rational but helpless individuals is not supported. We are using behavioral theory. We are strongly influenced by Herbert Simon and the notion of the boundedly rational individuals who are self-interested but don't have complete knowledge and are not fully selfish. You can be interested in goals for self, but you have various levels of preferences for outcomes for others. Starting to use heuristics and then learning better heuristics over time, and learning norms. And those norms are very, very important, having to do with monitoring and all the rest. And we, in our theory, we have been working at how the people develop trust that others are trustworthy and are cooperating. It's part of the problem that's central to the theory of collective action, as Mansur Olson laid it out, was people don't want to be suckers. So if we don't trust that others are going to cooperate, why should we go into an irrigation system and work 8 to 10 hours in the heat and dig and repair and all the rest, or do other things in forests or fisheries? Huge amount of work. But if we don't think it, if we do it and no one else does, we are a sucker. And people do not want to be a sucker. So part of the way the rules they develop affect outcomes is because they're making it more apparent to others that they are willing to contribute. So trust is quite central. This is one of the ways that in the book Working Together that Amy Motit and Marco Jansen and I just published, trying to look at learning and norm adopting individuals. So if we have that as our individual, given the micro setting that they're in and the broader, they can achieve levels of trust that other participants are reciprocators that can lead to increased levels of cooperation, net benefits, positive feedback. But if levels of trust go down, then this loop is less and less and less cooperation. So the loop can go up into more or down. And we've been trying to identify, by reading a lot of literature about the lab and the field, what are some of the micro settings. So the factors that we're finding are quite consistently related to building trust, have to do with that people are communicating, that's what I talked about, that there's some reputation of who's involved and how they have acted in the past. High marginal return, so that if we do a lot of hard work, there's some real benefit to it. What we're also finding is entry and exit capacity, and those who know Thibault's work earlier and our urban work that carries over. Longer time horizon, so that if people are really in a very short-term setting, they're less likely to develop ways of trust in one another and cooperating. There's some agreement about the sanctioning mechanisms. These are the factors that tend to increase trust that you can find, and we can then look at specific rules that enhance them, etc. But I don't have time to do that today. Then we are trying to think of that broader setting, and I'm not going to go into a great depth of that today, but some of you will have seen a paper in the PNAS and another paper in Science on a social ecological framework. And a group of colleagues in Europe and in the US are working very hard on this to get a broader sense so that we are not just micro-theorists, but we're looking at micro-action situations in a broader, and trying to look at sustainability across water, forests, and fisheries. So the highest level looks like this, where we're thinking about the resource system itself and the resource units, the water, the fish, whatever. Governance systems at multiple scales in terms of operational, collective choice, etc. And then actors who all of these interact in action situations. So the IAD there is in the middle. And there's feedback too. So this is one of these systems that evolves over time. It affects related ecosystems and social, economic, and political. So those both go both ways. In a broader setting, some of these things are affected by the political system they're in or affected over time. I'm not going to go to the second level. We could spend a whole semester on it, and that's exactly what we're doing. But if people are interested, in 2009 there is a science article, and there's a lot of things, and it is one by me, so it is fairly easy to find. But the key thing is that it helps us identify a variety of variables that affect interactions and outcomes. And the problem that we're facing, and why there was chaos in the early 80s, is that where people were working on so many different things, and they weren't connecting, and they weren't even using the same definitions of the terms. So we did not have a common language across the social sciences, let alone the ecological sciences. And this is not going to happen overnight. But we're slowly but surely developing a much better language that we can then be using when we do theory and then test it in the field and come back and improve it. So that this is kind of where I'm going to be spending a lot of my time in the future. And if we had time, I would go into it tonight, but we don't. So then let's just talk a little bit about policy implications. The resource systems that we've studied that are in good condition have users with long-term interests who invest in monitoring and building trust. Now, they also have the rules, but the rules are matched to that local rather than being the sort of thing of the blueprint that lots of people want to oppose. This is still not accepted. You read right now on the East Coast, there are huge debates on the fisheries on the East Coast and the effort to do a lot of a similar thing for the entire East Coast. Government protected areas are still recommended time and time and time, or privatized. Part of what we're really finding is that we've got to learn how to deal with complexity. It used to be, oh, that's too complex. Well, if medicine had said that about the human body 150 years ago, we would not be having the success with medicine. Not that it's perfect. We'll never be perfect. But the human body is an incredibly complex system of systems within systems within systems. We've got to accept it and not just say, oh, it's too complex to study, but how do we start breaking those systems and subsystems into meaningful units, and then learning and coming back, and it's going to take us a while to research, to get that knowledge, but we've got to learn how to deal with complexity rather than just rejecting it. And I hope we can get rid of panaceas, that there is one way of solving everything. And I'd like to thank Doug for all that you have contributed to all of our work through all of these years, to all the new institutional economist colleagues, for all that you have done. So we've been learning from a wide variety of you, and for all of your patience. This has turned out to be a long talk, and I'm sorry that it went on and on, but thank you for your patience.